Three questions. Are you a skillful speaker? Why does every single lawyer advise his client to say nothing at all? And lastly, if you're in a trap, what can make you free? Welcome to my channel, Let Me Slay Guy. If you've never been here before, what exactly do we do? We read the book of Proverbs. We read it slowly, word by word in Hebrew. And the reason we do this, Hebrew is this very complex, layered language, and it doesn't really lend itself so well to being translated to English, where you have to select one meaning and you leave the others out. What we do is we try to go back in and reconstitute them, show it in its original depth. So let's go ahead and jump into today's lesson. This is going to come from Proverbs 18:7. King James English translation is, "A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of the soul." So first glance, what would we take away from this proverb? If we had to summarize this in a single sentence, how would we do it? We'd say that having no speech filter can wreck a person. And that'd be a wonderful teaching. That's what most people would take away. It'd be adequate, but that's not what we do here. So let's look at this in Hebrew now. In Hebrew, this is pi kesil mekita lo usfata mokesh nafsho. So word by word in a concordance, that is, mouth of a fool is ruin for him, and the lips are a snare of his soul. So this first term, pi, it's the mouth of. This is the subject phrase. As we always discuss, the lead-off word sets the tone for what the entire proverb is going to be about. So the Hebrew word for the mouth is peh. This is what is doing the action. There's no primary term, but when you change it to the e, this means o. So it's going to connect to our next term. So it's the mouth of the fool. And we discussed in our last video is the idea of the peh, the mouth, as a total unit. It's going to include the heart, the tongue, and the lips. And what it's going to do is say that this person, this is their common way of behaving, that they speak in a self-sabotaging way. This is what makes them the fool, is their big, dumb mouth. And the proverb doesn't begin with the focus on the speech itself. It focuses on his mouth. And the main reason why is the mouth. This is part of him. He carries it everywhere he goes. He cannot avoid it. And in the Hebrew wisdom culture that these proverbs come out of, speech is never neutral. It always reflects what is the moral development, what is the character of the person speaking. And so it's going to demonstrate that this person, this kesil, did not take this part of their life seriously. And action is often wise and silent, but foolishness is almost always verbalized loudly, and it damages this person. And it's the mouth that reveals what the character is. And the speech is going to be where a person displays whether wisdom or folly is present in their life. That's how the outside world will know them. And we'll discuss the kesil here in just a second, but he's very closely associated with the idea of speech error. And this proverb is establishing what the source and the cause is. His mouth. It's what connects everything to it. And the proverb wants you to understand that harmful words cannot be safely externalized. They will both destroy and trap you. A wise man will not have this trait, but a fool will. So our next term, kesil, means a fool. It's a very common term in the Proverbs. He's a frequent flyer. He is a very common stock character, and this is who the mouth belongs to. The primitive root for kesil comes from a verb that means to be very dense, to be very thick, and to be heavy. So get the mental image of a boulder. Basic idea, this thing is difficult to move, and it doesn't absorb anything. So the kesil, he has 49 appearances in the Proverbs, and he's always used as the foil. He's the antithesis of the wise man. He shows us what to not do. And the kesil is a moral and spiritual category. His entire inner life is disordered, and folly is the total environment that he has everywhere he goes. And he has multiple character defects, and in the context of any one proverb is going to show which kesil trait is on display. So here, it's going to be about speech. It's usually about obstinance and stubbornness and a refusal to learn. Arrogance is another common trait of the kesil. He's very bad at taking correction. Think of the idea, again, an immovable object. He's impenetrable, like rain on a rock. But the other times, the kesil's error is impulsivity, not considering its consequences. And this is especially true with speech. And that is what is going to be on display in this particular proverb. He speaks and thinks, or speaks without thinking, and he creates this tremendous damage everywhere he goes. And this is a settled character trait. This is not an occasional mess up. He does it constantly. So our next term, mechita. And so this is the predicate. This is what the fool's mouth is doing. And when you begin this verb in a nominal form with this prefix meh, then it turns it around. It faces inward. So it's also saying that this is self-ruin, this is self-destruction. And the primitive root for katat means to be shattered, to be broken, or to collapse. And it has two contexts, and this is why we read these in Hebrew, because we'll miss this otherwise. There's a form of hatat that's internal, and then there's one that's external. And the external form is going to say that this person, their life will fall apart. They're going to lose it all. It'll be in shambles. There's irreparable damage, this kind of destruction, this kind of brokenness. But then there's also an internal form of hatat, and that is constant fear and worry. It's an anxiety. It's coming apart emotionally. It can also mean that there's a lot of shame. And usually whenever you see the idea of mechita, it's used to describe a nation that's being conquered or a king that is being overthrown. But the whole concept is that there's a forceful destruction and it's a decisive overthrow, that there's a loss of power and position. You go from the top to the bottom. And that's why many of the translations will use the term thrown down in English Bible translations. But the idea is that there's an inability to recover your position. And the other context of mechita is that it carries this emotional weight, that it's the anticipation of the destruction that's going to cause an internal unraveling. So it's this internalized terror while waiting. We would call this just like impending doom. But what it's saying is that this fool, this Kesil, he's destabilizing his own life because of his unskilled speech, and that there's social and relational consequences to speaking this poorly. And the Kesil, he has this repeated pattern of just shattering things, and his life is one of the things that he shatters, and his mouth is causing it. The Pi Kesil, the mouth of the fool, is again and again and again. And this personal ruin is going to stem from his own disregard of moral formation and wisdom formation. If he would have just learned, he could have avoided all this. And the emotional context, the other side of mechita, means that he's going to feel regret. He's going to have internal turmoil, and you can't unsay the terrible thing. So he's an emotional mess now, and his whole entire inner peace is gone. He's a wreck. He's shattered. Mechita. And then our next term, lo. Just basic prepositional phrase, means to him. It's the direct object. This is what is going to receive the ruination? Him. And la is the preposition that means to, and when you end with the suffix o, that makes it possessive. So it's his, he owns it. And it's establishing that there's cause and effect. His big dumb mouth caused this ruin for him personally. And it's not saying that generically a mouth can cause problems. It's saying it causes ruin, and it lands on him. And this is a collapse of social standing, ruined relationships, and this internal turmoil. There's no excuses. He can't blame anyone else. His words came back to him. His chickens came home to roost. So now we'll flip to the back half of the proverb. And a lot of these proverbs are going to show a contrast of what the good thing is or what the bad thing is. But this is going to compare two bad things and basically establish, that they carry out different formations, different ways of expressing themselves. So this first term of the second half is usvatav, and it's the conjunction, and it's going to tell you what's going to carry out the action in this section of the proverb. So the safat, this is a single lip, but safatim, this is plural for lips, but when you add this possessive suffix av at the end, then it becomes his lips. And there's no primitive root for safat. It just means a border or an edge. So idiomatically, the idea is the lips, they're this outer boundary of the mouth. And we discussed it in our last proverb, but the lips, they function as this gate for speech. They can either be up or down. And we have the same idea that the mouth, the lips themselves, they're a filter. And a person either has one or lacks it. And the lips, they're responsible for the discretion. They determine what goes out, what is shared. And the Hebrew wisdom culture that these proverbs come from, it holds that speech is a creation itself. It gives life to something that didn't exist. And very much the same way that God spoke creation into existence, anytime we introduce a new idea through our speech, this new thing exists afterwards. And that's the same idea. So there has to be extreme caution in what one is allowed to birth through their speech. And the lips have this responsibility to say yes or no. They can also determine when to stop if it's already begun. And the proverb is going to move from, in the first clause, this broader mouth unit, to now down to this more narrow, more specific one, which is the lips, the discretion of the speech itself. And the proverb's saying that these thoughts have now crossed the boundary. They have come to life. They are speech. And the Kesil, he missed the opportunity to stop them, and these damaging words, they could have remained inside him, but he didn't keep them there, and now that they're out, they can't be brought back. And so the first act of folly was forming the speech within himself. That was the moral failure. The second act of folly was releasing it. That is a wisdom failure, and it's going to eliminate any mystery of what is happening and why. He's saying these bad things, they're coming back to him. They're either going to trap or destroy him, and he was not intelligent enough to just holster his weapon and plead the fifth. He did not stop while he was ahead. He kept going, and now he is in big trouble. So our next term, mokesh, and this means a trap, and this is also a predicate, and this is going to link the subject to the direct object. So here it's saying what the lips will do to the soul. The primitive root for this verb is yakesh, which means to form a noose, to lay a trap, or to lay a snare. And again, when you begin with this mem, now we're going to move the verb to the noun. It's taking the nominal form, and this instrument that is formed is called a mokesh. And we have to think, ancient world, they really didn't have long range weapons the way that we do. Now we've got rifling, we've got scopes, we've got night vision, we've got all kinds of ways to shoot an animal from way far away, but they didn't. They had, at best, you could throw a spear, you could shoot an arrow, so you're looking at 100 yards or less. So what they would often do is they'd lay down these little snares so that the animal couldn't run away, or at the very least he'd be kind of hindered, and they could get in close enough to take a shot. And when we talk about snaring now, it means to fall for a trap, to take the bait and to get caught in this net. And so what it's saying here is that this lack of discretion with his lips means he doesn't avoid traps. And then once he's in them, he can't escape them. And a snare, the whole idea behind it is that it doesn't stand out. It's not obvious. The only time you notice you're in the snare is when it's too late. And it's another way of saying that he's inattentive, he's not vigilant, and he has participated in his own entrapment. And in the rest of the Bible and all the Proverbs, anytime you hear this idea of snare, it means there's a hidden danger that strikes suddenly. And the whole concept is that it catches people who are unsuspecting and careless. And a person who pays closer attention, they don't step in the snare. And it's basically saying that the person who gets caught in one, they're more like an animal than a human. They don't have survival-minded thinking. And they only realize the danger when it's too late and escape is no longer possible. And because they did not prioritize forming speech, his lips failed to protect him. And now he can't talk his way out of it. And in struggling against the snare, that's what tightens it. That's when you pull against it, it pulls the other side and it snaps down even harder. So it's kind of the image that the more he's trying to explain or clarify his position, the worse he's making it. So he's trapped and he's digging this deeper hole the more he talks and the more that he goes on about it. But the impact, as we're going to see, is now it's going to move from basic reputation or relationships, and now it's actually going to ensnare. It's going to trap his soul itself. And so that's our last term in the proverb, which is nafsho, means his soul. This is what is ensnared. And we're probably going to have to spend a little time on this term because it's pretty deep. The primitive root for this is nefesh, which means to breathe, to be restored, and to be refreshed. So the context is going to matter. What also complicates this is that technically the nefesh, it means the throat. It's a body metaphor, and that's what its nominal usage is, but that form is actually rare. Whenever you see the term nefesh in the Old Testament, it almost always means the soul, which is what it does here. And the nefesh is an identity marker. And the idea behind the nefesh is that there's a rhythmic breathing. There's a cycle of you work, you become exhausted, and then you take a rest and you're renewed. And this inhale, exhale cycle passing through the throat is why it's associated with the throat. The other thing is that the throat is the midway point between the heart and the nose and the mouth. And only living things breathe, and the breath is processed as it comes in and out. Everything must pass through this throat as a roadway, and it's going to connect spiritual and physical vitality into the cycle. And the whole concept being that end of breath equals end of life. The soul is alive so long as it's breathing, and there's no more restoration or activity cycle. That's when the spirit leaves the body. That's why the spirit clings so heavily to this existence. And I don't want to go too deep into it because the whole entire video will be too long, but Judaism has this concept of a higher and a lower soul. So the higher soul is called the neshama, and the lower soul is the nefesh. And the nefesh is the one that exists here in the earthly realm, and that's why it's a lot of times called an animal spirit versus the divine spirit. The neshama comes directly from God's breath. So like when you read in Genesis that God created man, it was the neshama that he breathed into the dust, and that filled Adam with life. But most of the time, the term for spirit won't be used as neshama, as this, heavenly divinely thing. It's the ruach, that's the part that's in the nefesh. Is the whole concept is that the spirit, the ruach, is created and animated by the neshama, and it's poured into this vessel made of flesh, and it becomes entwined, and that's what forms the nefesh, and that's what makes you uniquely you, is when this spirit mixes with this body. And so your nefesh, there's no one like you on earth. Where you're born, the time period in human history that you exist in, the nationality, who your parents are, what part of the earth you live in, who your friends are, the culture you grow up in, all of these things contribute to make you a unique creation, a nefesh. This is the reason why you can have the exact same DNA as your brother or sister, and each one of you will be totally different because you're each individually handcrafted at the time of creation with this spirit filling this particular body in this way. And that's your nefesh, is this extra close special attention and care that was formed in your creation. So the difference is the idea is the nefesh is the result, whereas the neshama is the source. And it's our nefesh that will be evaluated for the way that it conducted itself in this world. And also in Judaism, which all these proverbs come from, is this idea, we have it in Christianity as well, of an afterlife. Is the Olam Hazeh, this is the world we exist in right now, but the Olam Haba, that's the world that is to come. And the way that the nefesh conducts itself in the Olam Heza, the world that is, this is going to determine how it's seated in the world that is to come. And you either accrue positive or negative assessments while you're alive. And essentially the actions that you take on this plane, they matter when your physical life ends. And this is, I don't want to make the video all about the mystical elements, but the Proverbs saying is not only is this Kessil messing things up right here, right now on this plane, he's also earning bad marks in the Olam Haba, the world that is to come. And these errors, these are coming from the deepest part of him. This is his own spiritual maturity that's on display, and it's his nefesh, his nafsho, his own soul that's going to receive the judgment for talking this way. And essentially, this is the proverb capping with the idea that there are spiritual consequences for speaking poorly. This isn't just something that you deal with in basic daily life. Like the payment is even deeper later on. And Jesus comes out of this culture, and this is what rabbis would have taught back then, him included. That's why so many of his teachings has this idea of idle words, that we're going to come back to this. So let's take a closer look at this proverb now that we understand each one of these words and their individual meanings. Now the next thing that we do is we take a closer look at how are they arranged, and we'll find that Solomon was this incredibly gifted writer, the way that he could express multiple trains of thought all at the same time in a two-line form. I mean, this proverb only has 7 words, and we're going to find out it's really deep if we look at it even closer. Okay, so now we're going to look at the way that these concepts themselves are grouped together. And the first comparison that we're going to see, or really it's a contrast, is the instruments themselves, and that is the mouth versus the lips. And we've discussed this in some of the previous videos, that the mouth operates as a unit. Look, I've started to arrange the videos in playlist organized, by theme. So all the speech-related proverbs will be together. You can review them at any time if you look at the playlist. But the mouth will include the heart. This is the inclination and the intention of a person. This is going to show whether they are a cruel or kind individual. The mouth also includes the tongue, and the tongue is responsible for how we phrase things. And this will show if someone has skill. What is their tone? Who is the audience? How will it be received? This is all where the crafting of how the words actually come out. But the lips, they only have one job: discretion. That's it. Discretion only is whether to say it or not. And so when we're looking at the difference between the mouth and the lips, the mouth would be what's in the overall picture, the overall strategy of how to deal with speech in general. But the lips, this is going to be situation by situation. So it's a single front versus a multiple front war. The heart and the tongue craft, but the lips defend. And even a person who has no skill, no training in the other two, the heart and the tongue, they can still avoid the pitfalls if they can just focus on this one area, the lips. And that's the big areas that the fool, he fails at each of these 3 things, but the wise man, he excels at all 3 things. And if the fool had to pick one area to focus on first, where is the first step? What is the quickest and most important thing to fix first? It's going to be the lips, saying it or not saying it at all. He can develop the other 2 later on. And the heart is still this best overall guard against poor speech. And then a wise and skillful tongue is the next best thing. But the lips, they're the last line of defense. They are like the deep safety. If anyone gets behind them, there's going to be a touchdown. The wide receiver will be in the end zone. So the safety always has to remain the furthest back. That's your last line of defense, is keep those lips zipped. Second thing we see in the concepts or the consequences is the idea of destruction versus a trap, the mechita versus the mokesh. So with destruction, the damage is done. There's no way to repair it. You own this one. You have to accept the consequences. What's done is done. You're eating this, and about the only thing you can do if you were in the stage of mechita is just request mercy. Hope that the person won't come down on you too hard. And with destruction, you pay your dues, you serve your time, and you just try and recover later. But with a trap, destruction, this is past tense. This has already happened. The trap, this is a future tense. The ending is not yet determined. We don't know how it's going to end. We just know that you're stuck here now. And you know that the hunter is closing in, and that there's a brief window of time to get loose, and the time is not on your side. So it's going to require skill to escape. So more than likely, if you're trapped, it's going to take apology, it's going to take restitution, and it's going to mean you have to stop making it worse. And the best way that you escape from a trap is just like how an animal does, is you reverse, is you don't pull it tighter, you find a way to let it loosen, and you do it by backtracking, and you stop talking, you stop moving, you stop resisting it. And we have similar concepts. We say that you plead the Fifth Amendment, you zip your lips, and you do not entrench yourself any further, you do not double down, you surrender once you're caught. Third concept that we see is the actors themselves. So we list the Kessil, but who is the person that's not the Kessil? Well, he's not named. It's the wise man. He's not in this proverb, but he is kind of, if you know to look for him. And it's because he doesn't have these problems. The Chacham, the wise man, develops wisdom, so he doesn't have these tendencies. He won't say it in the first place. He recognizes the traps. He sees the danger. He avoids them. He prioritizes his own heart. He engages his tongue, meaning he thinks about how to say it. And wisdom always considers the consequences in the future. The Kessil, he deals with things as they happen. He's always reacting. And, the wise man, maybe he's made mistakes in the past, but he learned from them, so he doesn't repeat them. The Kessil, every single thing that the wise man does, he does in the opposite. He doesn't learn. He doesn't have a filter. He doesn't see the traps. He doesn't work on his moral development. And as a result, he's always in trouble. He's either in the process of being destroyed or trapped. And then the last of the concepts that we see grouped together is the impact. And that's the idea. Do they fall on the person in this realm, or do they have future ramifications on the soul? So the destruction, that's felt in the presence. That's an immediate response. And the idea is that punishment for idle words, those come later. The idea that we talked about, the olam haza versus the olam haba. And the person who has these untrained lips, he might feel like he got away with it. He didn't suffer destruction. He got in a trap, but it feels like he got out of it, and the person who is suffering destruction, they don't have any illusion. They know they're paying for it right now. And the person who has destructive, ruinous speech, they're judged by human standards, but the indiscriminate speech, the one with the lips themselves, those are going to be judged by a divine standard. And basically what this proverb wants you to walk away with is they don't want you to have a narrow view of speech as danger. They want you to understand that the danger also is at the soul level, that it impacts the afterlife. So it's spiritual. So we can sit here and talk about this forever, but we have to move on. But it is always nice to look and see the depth of the proverb when you just read it a little bit more slowly and see just how many elements are actually at play and how gifted Solomon was at framing these things, that there's an actual wisdom within the way that the structure itself operates. So to recap, a fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. King James Version translation, I give it 10 out of 10. It is right on the money, word for word, clause for clause, thought for thought. Fantastic translation. So first, big three takeaways. Number one, your big old mouth, it can get you in a heap of trouble, and you have to learn how to avoid danger. You have to prioritize skillful speaking and communications in your relationships. Number two, let's say you didn't do number one. You've blown it. Stop talking. Stop making it worse. Silence is always an option. And the snare is saying it in the first place, but the trap, that's continuing. And then the last one is thinking of speech and the way you express yourself as a spiritual matter will give it a lot more gravity. It'll force you to think about it in a deeper way. And you may think the thought, but you don't have to say it. You want this clean transcript because, as it says, the angels are listening and recording. So yeah, Proverbs 18:7, a fool's mouth is his destruction, and the lips are the snare of his soul. So what we do now is we are going to move on to the guided talks. Okay, so the first of the guided talks is what we call the dad talk. And the dad talk is just what it sounds like. It's fatherly advice. We just looked at this proverb in depth from the definitions and meanings of the words. We looked at a closer look of how they interact. We did a nice little recap. And it's great to understand the concept of the proverb, but how do you put the wisdom into action? Well, that's what we do here is we fashion it into a tool. If you just take these concepts and you put them into practice, you put them into play, you're instantly a wiser person if you start applying these. So this was clearly a proverb about speech. And in particular, the idea of ruinous, damaging speech. And the first thing that we'll look at is the idea that carelessness and emotion are the two most common tripwires that are going to cause you to say something damaging. And the whole idea is that once something has been said, it can't be unsaid. The comparison they say is you can't unring the bell. Well, you cannot unsay the horrible thing. And it's these heated moments where close relationships are especially vulnerable to these type of situations. Both sides are amped up, and the next thing you know, you've said something that you can't take back. And this relationship is now permanently damaged. And the idea is that physical wounds, those can heal, but a painful word will last forever because you can't unlive it. It's stuck inside you. And that's why And it's not just in relationships, but that's where it's going to manifest itself most often. But there's other ways that a person can ruin themselves, or get fired from a job, or any number of ways that not having this filter, not having a well-developed mouth, when we think of these three elements: the heart, the tongue, and the lips. But they will absolutely ruin you. You can do it from either of these three angles. So that's a main reason why we look to protect ourselves, is develop speech discipline so that you don't have to go through ruin. Second thing, we look at the back half of this proverb, and it's about the trap. And no matter who you are, no matter how gifted and how skilled you are at speaking, at some point you're going to make a mistake with your mouth. You are going to step over the line. This is why that whole idea of the safat, the lips are a boundary. You've stepped over it. You have crossed the boundary. You have to recognize when you've stepped over it and when it's time to shut up. Just stop talking. If you are in deep, stop talking. This is why, like we said, every attorney tells their client, plead the fifth, don't say a word. But if you continue to dig in and protract and go deeper, this is where a different type of error is not knowing when to stop talking. Just always understand, no matter how bad it gets, silence is always an option, and you just deal with the consequences and eat it and own it, and hopefully it doesn't get to the point of ruin. And then the last thing we're going to look at is this idea of, well, where would the ruin happen? We have to remember, when these proverbs were written, it was 3,000 years ago. They were in an arid Mediterranean climate. It's a different world, man. And the modern world, we use digital communication. We are on social media. We send emails. We send each other text messages. This is where somebody's going to make a speech error in the modern world. So whatever it is that you're posting online, whatever it is that you're sending through a text, always review whatever you've written out before you hit send, because you can be guaranteed, if you cross a boundary, it will come back on you. So now that we understand how this can be put into practice in the tangible real world, the next thing that we do is we look at, where can we use the wisdom to help us govern our inner person? Where does it speak to our lev? Where does it speak to our heart? Okay, so the next section of the video is what we call the lev talk. The lev is the Hebrew word for the heart, and it centers very, very heavily in all the Proverbs. And the main reason why is because the lev, from the Hebrew wisdom culture's perspective, this is the inner person. It has a lot of responsibilities, and one of those big ones is guiding the spirit. And we use these images, and we liken it to a parent raising a child, because initially the spirit, this Ruach, what we talked about in the first part of the proverb, it's a new creation. It doesn't know anything. It has to be taught, and it can learn through experience or by being led by its heart. And this lev, the first thing it does is it connects to God, and it learns God's ways, and then it can turn around and instruct this little Ruach and teach this spirit how to live. And the main reason why this infrastructure exists is because the instincts of the spirit are immature. They will always, kind of go more to like an impulsive range. And this is especially true with emotions. And the spirit is very self-focused. And because of that, it's very short-sighted. It's very, very insistent of its own needs, particularly expression. And a person who has a passive heart, the spirit can very quickly take the lead on how the person themselves is going to behave. And the spirit leading the person is great after that spirit has been matured, but it's absolutely terrible when that spirit has not been matured and it has not been properly raised by the lev. And it's the idea is it's the same reason why we don't let a toddler drive the car. It's going to end up in the ditch, and we cannot allow an immature spirit to lead either. And the lev, the heart, is capable of more discipline initially. Spirit can become disciplined over time, but the lev, the heart, this houses a person's will, their determination, and this is what's going to enact the goals and override the spirit's worst instincts. And when the lev is committed to God's ways, the spirit will experience these benefits, and then that's when the spirit will buy in and start to also change its posture. And we discussed in our last video the heart as a part of the mouth, and the mouth is a part of the heart. So the heart has its own unique challenges when it comes to speech, because this is the storehouse, and it's got to maintain what's actually in there. But it's also got a second job with speech, and there's a face down this challenger that every person faces. And the Hebrew wisdom culture calls this phenomenon the lashon hara, the evil tongue. And it's a natural inclination that every single person alive has to speak in a harmful way. And any person who relaxes their defenses or doesn't take this seriously they're going to become the victim of the lashon hara, and then they're going to turn around and victimize others. And there's lots of categories of what is called lashon hara, but it's basically it's anything that's negative or hurtful or can cause harm. So stuff like gossip and slander, insulting people, embarrassing someone, mocking someone, using curse words, having a harsh tone, screaming, calling names, telling tacky jokes, going for emotional low blows, basically cruelty of any kind. All of these fall into this realm of negative speech called lashon hara. And lashon hara is going to attack each of the three constituent parts of the peh, the mouth, which is why we work at identifying them. Almost every single time the lev, that the heart is going to fail at speech, it's going to be internal. It's not actually going to be lashon hara attacking the lev. The lashon hara attacks in an external way. So when you start to have like failings here in the heart, that's the storehouse. That's an internal thing. But the lashon hara particularly goes after the tongue and the lips. So how we craft our speech and our discretion of to say it or not. So how we phrase it and if we vocalize it. And the only people who can deal with lashon hara successfully, they have a strategy that they determined ahead of time. And anytime you are speaking, you have this brief moment where there is a chance to pause and consider the consequences. And the person who is developing their lev in this way, they're going to always think about that. The person who either doesn't have a strategy or doesn't know that this battle is going on, they're going to have this tendency to just step right into the snare, the mokesh. And the best hedge against all of this is to develop lashon tov, a good tongue. So this is a predetermined posture where you want to say uplifting things and you don't want to say harmful things at all. And you have to recognize that this whole arena, speech, this is the battlefield. This is where the primary place where someone's going to have folly. And this proverb states it very plainly. It's the nefesh that bears the consequences. So that means that speech is also partially spiritual. And this lev must be the one who's up to the task. And so the lev stores the emotions. It controls the spirit. It's the base of the entire mouth unit. This is the part that connects to God. This is what defends the spirit, even from its own weaknesses, and the heart is the guardian. So good speech always starts there. And the lev fights the lashon hara by overruling the tongue and the lips. And that only happens if the lev is engaged and even knows that a fight is occurring. And the success or failure here determines if the nefesh, the nafsho, his soul, is ensnared or if it walks in freedom. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look, where does this speak even deeper? Where can we take the wisdom of this proverb and apply it to our spirit, to our little ruach? Okay, and then the place where we close the video out is what we call the Ruach talk. So the Ruach, this is this spirit that's deep within inside us. And we're always looking for, where is there a uniformity between the Old and the New Testament? Where is God's universe always the same, yesterday, today, and forever? And for that reason, that means we're looking, well, where's the gospel? Where's Jesus in the proverb? Was there something that he either taught, something that he embodied in his actions? Is there just something that's we look at Jesus as this perfect model of a wise man living the way that he's supposed to? And when you read the Gospels, Jesus has this surprisingly dense body of teaching on speech error. I mean, he hammers it again and again and again in all four Gospels. And the main idea is that he really wanted people to understand that your motivations matter just as much as any action. As human beings, we have a tendency to think, well, as long as I don't do the thing, then I'm good. But, Jesus, he wants us to connect that, no, the motivations precede the action, and that's where you actually deal with it first. And he repeatedly emphasizes that the speech and even the thoughts themselves are as important as anything that someone does. And he wanted to reframe the way that people thought so that they would consider things more deeply, especially the way that they spoke. And the reason he does this is because speech is and will always be the primary source of sin in our lives. And this is the area where we are the most likely to divorce ourselves from God's holiness. And we can maintain visible obedience in our actions because we generally have enough self-control to throttle the worst of our sinful impulses, but we're not as successful when it comes to controlling our speech, and we're even worse at controlling our thought life. So we're told that if we even call someone so much as a fool, that hellfire is a potential outcome. I don't know about you, I've said way worse than calling someone a fool. And the main reason why we take speech so carelessly is because we are not holy and we don't understand fully what holiness actually is and what its requirements are. And speech is just one way that we sin. And when we think of sin, we're always looking for something big, and rather than these like little tiny ones. And we give ourselves a pass and we don't view these little tiny things, but Jesus sees and weighs the heart. And this speech, the way that we talk, this is how we make what's invisible, our heart, become visible. And that's why Jesus says it's from this abundance, from the overflow of the heart, that the mouth is going to speak. And that's when it becomes very obvious of just how unholy we are in the face of a holy and perfect God. And the scripture will tell us over and over and over in many different ways that our words will justify or condemn us, that we will give an account for every idle word we've ever spoken. And I cannot imagine most of the people watching this video get an A+ on that report card. I know I sure don't. And so yes, the fool's words, they ensnare him. They justifiably condemn him, both in this world and the world to come. He gets destroyed and trapped. It endangers the soul itself. And God, fortunately for us, is not okay with that. He understands his holy standard is so high that every single one of us will receive condemnation if he applies that standard to us. And the truth is, it's actually sin that ensnares the soul. Sinful speech is just the way it expresses itself outwardly and tangibly. And because this human heart is not holy, it must be made so. And it has to be convicted of its own sinfulness, number one. And then it has to be washed of this sin through forgiveness. It has to have its penalty paid, and then it has to be covered in righteousness. And this is how an entire soul is set free from the snare of large and small sin that would otherwise condemn it. So yes, the words of the fool, they ensnare the soul, but it's the words of Jesus Christ that make the soul free. Not just set it free, they make it free. And it does this in an ongoing way. He tells us that we have to continue in his word, to live as his disciple, not just knowing about the truth, knowing him, knowing the truth personally, intimately. And the truth is not this abstract concept. It's, personalized. It's this relationship with the truth, with Jesus. And Jesus' mission was never to compile a bunch of data that would condemn a person's soul from all the dumb things they said. He's here to liberate them in truth and annul the consequences for the bad speech that inevitably is going to come out of this person. And he does that so that an abundant life can flourish. And he wants to treat us as holy, even though we are not holy. And we have to come back to this idea of the nefesh, of just the handiwork, the attention to detail, the love that went into crafting a human soul. This idea of the nefesh, of pouring this spirit into this particular body and this particular family at this particular time. You're his personal handiwork. It means you have value. It means he doesn't want to lose it. And that's why he doesn't want any soul to perish. It's on this gigantic rescue mission to make sure that the fool and the sinner can know God personally and experience his love deeply and intimately, so that they don't have to go through mechita. That's salvation. And that's what Jesus came to do. So I hope you enjoyed this proverb and you got a little bit more of an understanding and can see the wisdom that works at all these different levels. We often end the video by explaining, the world's this dark place. It really needs the gospel. It really needs light to go out into it. And it lacks a lot of wisdom. So wisdom is not just for the believer, it's for anyone. It calls all of us to come and listen to what Solomon calls Lady Wisdom's voice. And that's just very, very easy evangelism, is to let somebody else know that a channel like this exists, that we open the Word of God and we do it deeply and seriously and consistently, and we look and we find this deep wisdom, and it's a benefit for everyone. So if there's a particular proverb you want to see broken down in this long form way, maybe it's your favorite, maybe it's one that confuses you, maybe it's just something famous, leave it in the comments, or you can email me, that mishleigui@gmail.com, THATMISHLEIGUI@gmail.com, and we'll put it in the queue and we'll get around to it. But yeah, we kind of compare it that life is this big gigantic test, and God, he doesn't just want you to pass it, he wants you to ace it. So that's what the Proverbs are. That's what the Mishlei are for, is so you can have these answers ahead of time. And it's great when you pass your test, but it's even better when you help someone else pass theirs. And life is very painful if you live in folly, and God's word exists so that we don't have to live in folly. We can avoid these patterns, and you'll continue to make mistakes. But if you listen to Lady Wisdom's voice today, it no longer has to be this way. Shalom, shalom.